February 3rd, 2025, and the time is 5:30 p.m. I'm calling to order tonight's work session. First up, agenda item A, city updates by Mayor's Chief of Staff, Mr. Brian McCain.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
I'm excited to say that the general public sales for the Pueblo Wings of Pride Air Show go on sale tomorrow, Tuesday, February 4th at 8 a.m. You can buy your tickets at pueblowwingsofpride.com/tickets. This is the air show that we've been working on for the past few months. It's going to be September 27th and 28th, and it's featuring the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds, of which I'm a former member of the Air Force, so that's kind of cool. And not the Blue Angels like everybody keeps saying. It is the Thunderbirds. El Centro del Quinto Sol. Join Senior Social Wednesday mornings with Pueblo Parks and Rec at El Centro from 10 to 11 a.m. at $2 a person. Then call SRDA to reserve your lunch at 719-543-0100 to reserve your meal by 9 a.m. the day before. Must be 6 years or older to reserve. Basketball skills are offered every Friday from 12 to 4 p.m. at El Centro for middle and high school players free of charge. Its skill coaches focus on ball handling, passing, shooting, speed, and agility. Pueblo Parks and Rec registration for spring sports is officially open for the adult cornhole and adult kickball. Register online or by phone at 719-553-2790 with Pueblo Parks and Rec, or you could go in person to City Park to their headquarters there. One thing that I want to bring up tonight is a bill that was introduced by Senator Nick Hendrickson. He's one of the prime sponsors on it. It's Senate Bill 25-062. It's the failure to appear charges in municipal court. The bill prohibits a person's failure to appear from forming the basis of a municipal criminal charge against the person and prohibits a municipal judge from imposing a jail sentence for a person's failure to appear. The bill adds the failure to appear and contempt of court for the failure to appear prohibitions to the list of state laws that cannot be superseded by charter or ordinance enacted by a home rule city. The bill clarifies that for the purposes of the bill, failure to appear includes contempt of court for the failure to appear or any other term used by a municipality to refer to a person's failure to appear at a scheduled court date. What this bill basically does is it will take away the ability from our municipal court and criminally charging somebody with the failure to appear or contempt of court, which, as you know, the past few years, this has been utilized in Pueblo for people that fail to appear or contempt of court for hundreds, of times or dozens of times over the past 3 years. Right now, CML recommends an amend position on this. I personally, and the mayor as well, think that we should be opposed to this as is with an amend provision on it. So not opposed or supportive of the bill, but amend the bill or opposed as is. So if you want to talk after, I have a letter going around. If you want to sign on to that, meet me individual after the meeting and we can talk some more. The bill is in front of you up there if you want to read about it, a little more on it. And that concludes my update. Any questions?
Okay, any comments, Council or Martinez?
Brian, 2 questions. My first question is, what's the difference between the Thunderbirds and Blue Angels?
Thunderbirds are better. I'll just say that. Yeah. So sitting up here, I could say that the Thunderbirds are better. They're both just the teams that the Navy and the Air Force use.
Oh, Blue Angels is Navy.
Yeah, Blue Angels is Navy.
That's what I guess my question was.
Thunderbirds are Air Force. I think the Blue Angels are F-18. Is that what it is, Chief?
Yes.
Yep. And then the Air Force are F-16, so they're a cooler plane.
My second question is, what's the amendment proposed by CML?
They haven't said yet. I could go into detail with it. There's one provision that specifically says, and I could read you what my recommendation is. I would not oppose the bill if it were limited to failure to appear for a first appearance on a summons or complaint, but object to the bill as is because it implicates a court's inherent contempt power and undermines a court's ability to hold a person responsible for repeated willful failure to appear and failure to comply with the terms and conditions of a bond. And that's sort of what CML is talking about as well, that provision. The majority of the bill, there's no issues with it, and it's stuff that we already do in our municipal court that I think is fair and just in the way that we run that. But that provision in it specifically is where it limits our ability to criminally charge somebody that just doesn't show up for court repeatedly over and over.
And that statement that you read is your statement or CML statement?
That was my statement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
CML has not come out with an official statement on it so far.
Do we know when it's in committee?
It is in committee this Wednesday
Oh,
at 1:30.
Okay. President Mark Ayler, please.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. He just swallowed wrong. So one of the interesting things is that the Pueblo Senator is the primary sponsor on it. And my question is that I guess it's for the mayor or the chief of staff. I mean, before this bill came out, I mean, do we have any contact with our local representatives? Do they ever ask, how do you feel about this? Do you know why he's the primary sponsor on this, knowing what we go through with crime?
No, we were just as surprised as you, President Ayler, to see that he was the sponsor when it dropped. We had heard that he was going to potentially sponsor the bill, but my office hasn't received any communication specifically about this bill, or the court period.
Well, that seems to have been a problem for years and years, is that we really don't have this, this open door, this relationship with our representatives. And I just find it hard to believe that we're all in government, we all are striving for the same things. And I don't know, maybe we ought to try and start that, those conversations so things like this don't happen. But I'll be glad to sign the letter.
Councilor Flores, please.
Yeah, I just am a little bit confused. It looks like they're trying to take this power away from the municipality like Pueblo, but my concern is this, it sounds like what we're saying is that, we're not for the way it's written now, but we don't have any suggestions on how to make it better. Is it because we're waiting to see what CML wants to do?
No, right now, they're going through the stakeholdering process, and then the first committee hearing is this Wednesday at 1:30. It's in the Judiciary Committee. I think that the majority of the bill, again, we're fine with. It's just that provision that strips away the power to basically, charge for this. And going through the amendment process, that's where they'll discuss it and propose. And there's still a couple more levels that it needs to go up where they discuss these amendments. And of course, if we give the direction to our lobbyists, they can file for that position and work with the stakeholdering groups. The letter that you have in front of you, Councilor Flores, it basically just outlines that one provision. I think that would either take it away or change it to first appearance. That would be where personally I would be more comfortable with it as a
We're only
municipality.
talking about contempt at this point.
Contempt and failure
Yeah.
to appear. Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah, Mr. McKinn, can you give me the phone number for that 719 number again in reference to, I'll keep this, so.
Oh, yeah. Where's it at? 719-543-0100. Or I'm sorry, that is for, yes, that's it.
0100.
Yes.
Councilor Maestri.
They always say that Colorado's behind the times, and with this decriminalization that's been going on for years, whether it be crime related, drug related, so forth. I don't even know why we're still going down that avenue here at the State House, but keeping this decriminalization just keeps adding to more and more problems. And it's what we talk about as local legislators, what our PD has to what in our DA's office and the court systems is that we have criminals out there that they just, and so I will be signing this because I don't, I see a lot of recriminalization through the different states, counties and municipalities and so forth, across the nation because they've tried this and it doesn't work. And that's, I don't know why we have to be behind the times with it and continue it, but it really kind of needs to stop here in the state of Colorado. We need to get back to people, living through the consequences of their actions, being responsible for that. Thank you.
Councilor Martinez.
I guess this is kind of similarly to the legislative update, but Councilor Gomez, I noticed on here that there's no lobbyist update. Normally, we have them weekly during the legislative session. I'm just curious if that's gonna be a thing or.
I can pass
every
this on to
other
Brian. Can you answer that for me?
Yeah, I could talk to our lobbyists and I'll work with Counselor Gomez and I think they need to be on weekly.
Just because things are changing so rapidly at
Think
this
you're right.
rate, that it would be helpful to have the lobbyists come every week.
Thank you.
And I am meeting with them weekly right now. So we're going forward weekly. So if they can't provide an update, I'm more than happy to do that.
Any other comments from council? We good? Okay, next up, agenda item B, the Pueblo Shelter update with interim this is a mouthful, CDBG Home Housing Administrator, Melissa Cook.
Good evening, council. Thank you for having me this evening. We're going to give you an update on the shelter. So we presented on December 21st and we had some homework that was assigned to us that we've done, and we want to come back to you and essentially get guidance on what the next steps are for the Pueblo shelter. So quickly, we'll do just a few short shelter updates. We want to talk about some case studies that we have seen throughout the state, or lack thereof, actually, of case studies. We want to look at operating scenarios and give you our recommendation and then ask how we should actually proceed. So just quick updates. Most of this, you should know, the land was transferred to the city back in November. The Pueblo Rescue Mission nonprofit has fully dissolved as of the end of the year. The shelter is the emergency shelter at the Porch Light campus is currently open nightly from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And average sheltering numbers right now for the main shelter at 728 West 4th are between 20 and 40 residents on average per night. Those are the ones in the residential program. And then in the emergency shelter, we're seeing about 30 to 40 folks in there. That said, during the extreme weather event we had in January, we did see significantly more than that in our shelter. So January 19th, 20 and 21st, when we were open 24 hours a day during those extreme cold events, we had almost double what we were seeing on average. So during the last meeting, Councilor Martinez, you had actually asked us to look at some case studies and whether there were other municipalities throughout the state that were operating their own shelters. What we found was it was actually hard. It was hard to find any information, really. So there were very few case studies, and the ones that we did find were not in similar sized cities to Pueblo. So the ones that we found were either very large urban areas like your New York City, LA, and Chicago, or they were very rural, local, or Colorado municipalities. And when I say rural, a lot of these were actually using unused jail cells to double as their warming shelter for one night, because the number of homeless that they have within their community is very, very few and far between. So we're talking about Rifle, Colorado, or, really small rural areas. So what we did after not finding much information on this that would be translatable to Pueblo is we reached out to our friends up at DOLA at their Office of Homeless Initiatives. They give out all the emergency solutions grants. So if there were shelters that were doing this throughout the state, they would be the ones to know. And we did identify that there is Loveland and Lakewood that were operating or currently operating their own shelters. So we were able to reach out to both of those. First, Loveland, they have their South Railroad facility, as you can see here in these photos. It really doesn't translate well to what we're doing. These are semi-permanent all-season tents, and they are dry tents. They do not have any sort of restroom or shower facilities within the tents. You do have to exit those facilities to go to the on-site restrooms that are contained in those other buildings. You can see they're on-site. They have minimal on-site staff that's also in one of these movable containers, and they are only open for severe weather events. In this case, it's actually only for severe cold. The other one is the city of Lakewood. So what's happened with the city of Lakewood is they used some of their, I believe it was ARPA funding recently to purchase what used to be a movie theater. They recently released an RFP to identify a shelter operator. So they wanted to find someone there that they were in the same boat as we were, or as we are just a few short months ago. And so they are only though looking for an emergency cold weather sheltering with 20 degrees or lower, or 32 degrees or lower if it's snowing. And so what they did is they did identify somebody. We do have a copy of the RFP that they use. It's very similar to what we are looking at. They were able to contract with an organization, a nonprofit organization named Recovery Works, who also happens to run their navigation shelter. So it feels very reminiscent of the situation that we are currently in. When we were talking to the staff, we actually talked to both the executive director of Recovery Works as well as the Lakewood city staff. And Lakewood shared their concerns about this, what the concerns that they had about running their own municipality, running the shelter, just because of liability concerns and the cost concerns, which we're about to get into. And then just to note that the lack of these available case studies shows that it is quite rare and the Pueblo's in a very unique situation. If, you know, with the city running the shelter, this is not something that you see across the United States. So let's first look at our operating scenarios. Okay, so these are much more in-depth than what we gave you last time. First, we're going to look at revenue. When we looked at this, when we tried to forecast this out, we looked at likely revenue sources. And then we had some methodology of the amount that we thought might come into the shelter based on either actuals or estimated or current grants. And then we created a whole pro forma to where we could see when those funds would come in based on their existing grant cycle. So we looked at the existing grant cycle, how much time it would take on average to get a contract through, and then eventually when those revenues would start coming into the shelter. Now, this is going to be very similar, whether it's the city operating the shelter or whether it is a nonprofit operating the shelter. And so these are the likely revenues that we see. So first, we see about $50,000 coming from CSAC. That's just taking an average of the last 5 years' awards. DOLA, we can reasonably expect that we might get through their emergency solution grant about $100,000 annually. A new one that we are looking at projecting is actually applying to our own CDBG funds. There is up to 15% allowable in the CDBG funds for this use. And we think that if we could take or apply for 7.5% of those, half of the allowable expense, that would be reasonable and it would be a competitive application. So that'd be 109,000. And you can see it just continues to go down the list. There's a lot that are clearly going to be omitted here because these are the ones that we really feel confident about that we can soft pencil an amount in. I do want to be very clear that these are just estimates and these are not any sort of guarantees, of course. What we would have is either we would have to, or a nonprofit would have to then go out and seek other sources of income. We can get donations. If you're a nonprofit provider, Colorado now offers a tax credit for homeless service providers. There are private donations, there are churches, there are corporate donors. You know, a nonprofit provider could do some sort of fundraiser, like the fundraisers that we all attend regularly. You could have some sort of dedicated revenue stream, like a thrift store. That's something that we see very common with some of these shelter operators. And then, of course, lots of other grants out there that are one-time, that are not those ones that we can pencil in on a recurring basis. And so just other areas that we looked at for possible revenue generation. So on the expense side, we worked with our HR department and the HR director independently reviewed the existing shelter jobs. So we were able to get from the shelter their current jobs, their staffing levels, and a brief description of each of those positions. We then gave that to our HR director to try to identify what that equivalent would be in a civil service position if we were to run this as a city department. On top of that, they would then calculate the fringe benefits. We did give these to her to review independently, so she didn't know the actual dollar amounts associated with the existing nonprofits. And as you can see, they actually came in really close. And so the salary itself is very close. The problem, and where this becomes very expensive for the city to run a shelter as a city department, is your fringe benefits. And so this monthly cost would be $43,000 for city staff, plus the $33,000 in fringe benefits if the city were to operate this as a city department. And so just looking at these, so this is the meat of the numbers. I kind of explained to you how we got to these numbers. But the meat of the numbers is here. So this first one I'm showing you is, this is if we have a nonprofit provider come in and operate this. I projected this out 3 years based on the revenue sources that would come in, the natural grant funding cycles that take 2 years to ramp up fully, and the expected expenses that we would have with some cost of living built in. Ultimately, in the first year, we know that the city is going to be stepping up and is going to be required to pay for this, whether it's a city operating it or a nonprofit operating it, because they do not yet have those grant dollars. So the first year, the gap in funding is essentially $604,000. That's what we've been reporting to council, that it costs about $50,000 a month to operate the shelter. And this is operating at its bare bones. This is operating just nightly shelters and the emergency shelter. In 2026, you can see that amount drastically goes down when you have some of the revenue sources start to come in, that gap is $375,000. And then in 2027 and beyond, it stays at about that $180,000. So that $180,000 is either what needs to be fundraised over and beyond the amounts that we project to come in, or that's where other avenues would have to come in, maybe, city assisting as well. And then if we look at the same thing, if this was a city-run department, it's much more expensive. We still brought in the revenues, but you can see it just costs the city more funds because of those, and it's really primarily because of those fringe benefits, that the gap for the first year is $1 million. And I would like to just also clarify that when I say the first year, I'm just talking about the first 12-month period. I'm not necessarily talking about a calendar year. So these are just 12-month periods. And then with those revenue sources coming in, of course, it does go down, but that gap is significantly larger than if we had a nonprofit partner operating the shelter. Oops. Okay, and then this is just in there to show you the difference side by side and what those two would look like. So what do we recommend? After all of this, we really do think that there's pros and cons to both of these, and we need to identify what we have. So if the city runs this as a department, number one, we have complete control. We ensure continuity of services. We know that this, would never have to be shut down. And we ensure the longevity of sheltering operations in the city of Pueblo, with it being part of the city. The cons, of course, it's more expensive. We do have some procurement challenges. We cannot go out and just, purchase things like a nonprofit partner could do. We do have to follow the city procurement code. There is a liability to the city operating this. There's always a certain amount of liability when you own and or operate or do both a property. We could potentially be less competitive for grant funding opportunities, which we did discuss briefly last time, but there have definitely been some conversations about philanthropic grant funding opportunities and the city being a recipient of those, that I do think there could be some challenges for your normal, like the ESG grants and things that are traditionally used for shelter providers. I don't think that we would have issues there, but for some of the other grants, I do think that the city operating it could limit possibly or make us less competitive for certain grants. And then the other thing too is I do think it would make it more difficult for the city to receive donations, philanthropic donations, because we are not tax exempt. They wouldn't be tax exempt donations. With our nonprofit partners, really, of course, it's more cost effective. They don't have those procurement issues, more competitive for grant funding. They would have we would expect that they carry their own insurance as part of their subrecipient agreement. So pretty much just the opposite of everything that would be the con for the city. But the con for the nonprofit partners, the big one is that, the city's not the only governing body. They have their own board that does govern what their day-to-day operations are, and they likely are mission-driven, and this shelter may or may not be the only mission-driven activity that they're carrying out. So we would suggest that we do publish an RFP, a request for proposals, to seek a qualified nonprofit organization that's interested in operating the shelter. What we would suggest is that we actually allocate funding to this RFP for a minimum of a year, up to $604,000 as determined by the pro forma. The city would expect that the fundraising partner or that the nonprofit partner ramp up fundraising efforts in the first year. And we would expect a very detailed report in the RFP submission detailing exactly how they're going to do that, what funds they're going to be applying for, and how they may cover other gaps. And while we know that we cannot allocate funding for future years, we want to make sure that this partner, if we do move forward with this, knows that we are committed to the success of this shelter and that we would at least consider a request in future years to help them with that gap as they're still continuing to ramp up. So the successful respondent to this RFP, we would make sure that we have a subrecipient agreement with a very defined scope of work. They need to have clear KPIs, and we need to make sure that we are monitoring those KPIs regularly. And the city will have clear oversight measures. One thing that's important to know is with the Pueblo Rescue Mission, the city did not have any direct oversight over the Pueblo Rescue Mission. The Pueblo Rescue Mission was its own independent nonprofit organization that had their own governing board of directors. And so, yeah, this relationship would look much different than it did before. And then the city provides maintenance to the physical asset. So city staff would be in there on a regular basis. So just looking at that oversight and what it could look like, there's a lot of different ways, and none of this is necessarily decided, but I just want to show that we will have the ability to have significant oversight on this nonprofit provider. This will not be us handing keys over to a nonprofit organization and asking them to just operate the shelter and then we step back. So we would have financial oversight. This could look something like we would require that they give us mandatory budget meetings. We would look at their profit and loss for the month, see any overages, any underspending, and identify the reason for that. We could have something like the mayor could appoint, maybe ask for an appointed seat on their board for her or her designee. We would, review audits. We would conduct our own audits, and we would have very prescribed and in-depth financial reporting required by this partner. As far as operations, as I mentioned, the KPIs before, but we would also have regular inspections because we're going to be in this asset. So whether they're formal inspections or just our maintenance team in there, conducting routine maintenance, we will be in the property on a regular basis. And I think really that's it. So we have two ways that we can move forward. Do we move forward and operate this as a city department, or do we try to move forward and identify a partner? We still do not know if there is appetite out there to find a partner. We have had discussions with some nonprofits, but we don't know for sure that anyone will respond to this RFP. I do have concerns with the way that things are operating right now. While the relationship is going really well with SafeSide, they are a small nonprofit organization, and their very small things could disrupt this relationship that we have going on right now. They're doing a tremendous job, I'm not saying anything, but with them being a small organization, if they lose, one or two key personnel, then maybe they're not able to operate. And so I think that we need to move quickly in trying to identify a long-term solution. SafeSide has been great in the interim and temporary to keep the shelter open, but we do need to move one way or another to identify something long-term.
Okay, excuse me, Melissa, so we can stay on track a little bit. I know the council's fighting to get some questions to you. Is anybody here? Because I've got a couple of Council Martinez. Go ahead.
First of all, that was a tremendous amount of work, doing, following up with other communities, getting the, all of the different, budgetary proposals for the two separate things. So great job on doing all of that work. I have several questions, Melissa. My first question is on the budget. Can we go back to that slide, Clyde or Melissa, whoever's driving? Okay, what are other expenses?
They are things like Wi-Fi, food is in there. Wi-Fi and food were two of the big ones. They're not much, just other outside of utilities, things that you would need to operate a shelter. Insurance, thank you. Yeah.
Insurance. And okay, I think that helps. For food, how are conversations with CareInsure going?
They've been progressing along nicely. Mike Purdy, who's our liaison for the shelter now, has had several meetings with Karen Scher to get back on track with the contract. Hopefully we'll be seeing that happen soon. And in the meantime, yeah, he's been seeking different co-ops to get food donated to the shelter every week. And we've had several small businesses donate meat just to keep their day-to-day operations going. So the community has really stepped up to help with the food in the shelter.
Great. So I really appreciate staff's recommendation on moving forward with the RFP or RFQ or whatever, the RFP. I think that makes the most sense, one, in terms of, you know, financially, and two, I think that while we're doing a great job right now, there's other nonprofits who do this job every single day and have the experience and the expertise and the connections to really do the work, you know, with fidelity, have best practices. So I would be in favor of moving forward with the RFP. I also am in favor of committing those funds for this next year. You know, it's funny because as you were talking, I literally wrote down, well, it would be like in the RFP, we could just say that staff or the mayor would have to have a seat on their board for that oversight, which I think is a brilliant idea. I'm also wondering, you know, to prevent more turmoil and turnover, if we can say as part of the RFP, like you have to a minimum of at least 5 years. Like whoever is biting on this has to commit to at least 5 years. And I think that you know, I think that that'll kind of help to the sustainability and the longevity of whoever we get, but that's the direction that I am going to give is the RFP, and then having that amount that you suggested in there for this next year.
Okay, and Councilor Maestri, no? Nothing? President Ayla.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. That's a lot of good information. I have a couple questions. When you showed the expenses and the deficit, you began the presentation with, we're going to get these grants. 50,000 here, 109,000 here, but they're not shown here in your budgets.
Yeah, that's correct for year one. They are showing as they're coming in with year 2 and 3. But these grant cycles, like the emergency solution grant, for instance, it is a grant that does not even open until fall of this next year. DOLA has about a 6-month window for contracting. And so we actually went through and looked at each of the grants that we could get when those grant cycles would come in, and we would reasonably start receiving those funds. So that's why you see this ramp up. I have a fairly large spreadsheet that actually projects out monthly what those incomes would be. So you are right with year 1. With year 2, there's more that come online, but it's not until late in year 2 that you would even see the CDBG dollars coming in. And so a lot of this stuff just has a really long ramp up time.
But your assumption is we'll get nothing. There'll be no grants come in year 1.
That's correct.
It'll just be 0.
Yeah, I mean, there might be some smaller grants for some of these nonprofits that maybe, but the traditional funding streams, there would not be a window for those grants to open and then receive those funds in the next 12 months.
When we talked, I think it was earlier last year or probably in the middle of the year, when the mayor's office came out with a report on what we spent on homelessness. What was that dollar amount?
I think it was $16 million over several years.
How many years?
4 or 5. It had to do with all the CDBG funds, all the ARPA dollars that were spent. So it was all of our pass-through funding that we received.
So literally the city pays or has paid in the past close to $4 million a year, $3 million a year.
I mean, in CDBG funds alone, we get $1.4 million allocated, and some of that has to go to housing, some of it goes to homelessness. So in the numbers that I provided to you, it was housing and homelessness. So a big chunk of that funds comes from CDBG funds every year at 1.4 million.
So all I know is from experience. And it seems to me that when you look at a budget, if the city runs and is the sole operator of the shelter, if you show $1 million a year for the city to run that shelter, but it reduces some of the other monies that we spend, it may be less expensive to run the shelter than to subsidize and do a lot of different programs that we traditionally have done, but we didn't run the mission. We just subsidize it sometimes, sometimes not. So, I mean, that's a very hard, that to try and figure out exactly what that's going to be. But if you think about it, $1 million a year to run a shelter, and if that's all you spent, it's a heck of a lot cheaper than what we've been spending. So I don't see where it makes the argument that a private operator is so much better or so much less expensive than a city operator. I get the argument that a private nonprofit that specializes in homelessness may be able to do a better job. But let's think about our history. Our history is we've used people who are experts and great in their field, and we've been left in the dust every single time. And we've always had to subsidize it. And the Springs Rescue Mission comes to town, just moves out. The rescue mission takes over, and it's all well documented all of the problems that happened because of that. There was tons of problems before the Springs Rescue Mission took over the Pueblo Rescue Mission and started. So I think when you talk about it's going to cost $600,000 the first year, $300,000, $200,000, you can double that in what you're going to be subsidizing to bring in a private operator. I'm just not convinced that the best way to go is not with a city operation. I think that you're controlled and being able to maintain the operations and know exactly what's going on at all times. Not to mention, I can't imagine an operator wanting to come in here and follow all of the rules that we're going to put in place based upon the presentation, saying, well, yeah, we're not going to do that. Again, they answer to a board. They don't answer to city council. They don't answer to the mayor. In essence, we're just going to be the landlord. Obviously, we want control. We want our cake and we want to eat it too, but I don't think that that's being reasonable. I don't know. I'm just not sold on the fact that a private operator is the best deal based upon our history and the amount of money, the sheer amount of money we spend every year, and we have no control, no anything. I don't know. That's where I'm at.
Okay, anybody else? I'm gonna throw something in real quick. Just some observations I've made and just some hard truths we better face up to. I don't know how much participation, so I've heard different things. I've talked to different folks and some of the faith-based organizations that may or not be there. I don't know what that is, but the fact that the city stepped in when we had the coldest times of probably the century and did our temporary job to try to keep people alive is pretty commendable. But, I am concerned about the pros versus the cons and the city running it. The cons are clearly outweighing the pros. That's an issue I have. And I'm just concerned if we don't get participants from outside the county and getting these tell us, what is the issue? Why are you backing off? Well, some of the things I was told, some of the clientele or the visitors to their operations are destroying the property. Their bathrooms are full with heroin, foiled paper everywhere. They're destroying some of the property. So I understand that. But if we had that all fixed, I think there would be a reason for me to support the city doing it. But you don't have that help right now. I don't see it. Unless I'm not. I mean, maybe the mayor can answer to that, but that's what I'm not seeing, helping you guys do this.
No, we have people that work with the city that go there every single day. And we have great support from Safe Side and the employees that we have at the rescue mission currently. The problem is going to be is if we go out to hire employees and it becomes a city-run department, that we might not get the same people who are currently employed apply for the jobs or be granted the jobs to work there is my concern about it coming into a city department. But it's not because we're having a hard time currently. Everything has been running very smooth. We've been sheltering tons of people. We've been receiving tons of donations for the community. So it's not particularly that. February will be the first month that the city has to pay Safe Side because they had money left over from the rescue mission, a grant that they had received that the rescue mission turned over to Safe Side to pay the bills for January. So February will be the first time the city is using the money that you set aside in October to pay. And so I think we're just trying to get the plan moving forward. And so that, in 2 months, I don't come to you again saying essentially we need more funding or, we haven't got to the plan. And so that's kind of,
So
why
you
we're here looking for what the council wants to do, what the city wants to do next. It's not because we're having additional problems or we don't have the help that we need, because we do.
So you see the costs decreasing, sort of like startup costs, I guess, that the front end of this thing, if I got that right, and those gonna eventually decrease, so it's more manageable?
If we work with a nonprofit who can apply for grants, as Melissa said, people really aren't going to be probably granting the city of Pueblo grants to continue to run the shelter unless we're applying for a DOLA grant, which we are currently applying for a planning grant to come in and look at the shelter and then apply for a much larger grant come fall. But it costs us about $54,000 just to run the shelter, bare minimum, and paying the employees without the fringe benefits that the city provides. So that dollar line could potentially decrease a little bit when we come into spring and summer because we're not going to be running the emergency shelter that we're having to staff every single night. So you will see the wages drop off because we won't have as many employees to staff that side. But pretty much the basic dollar amount is about $50,000 to run the shelter at a bare minimum.
So the only comparables that you looked to were LA, New York, Chicago, right?
We looked at Lakewood and
Lakewood, okay.
Loveland as the
And those-
comparables.
I'm just curious about the population comparatives too, and what kind of,
So to be clear, the comparables that we looked at were local jurisdictions, local municipalities that were running and operating their own shelter. Of course, we can absolutely, and as part of this process, we've already done one shelter tour. We intend on doing more just to learn best practices and touring shelters of cities the same size, but those are operated by nonprofits. The two were just the only two in Colorado that we could find that weren't, towns of 100 or people or less. I'm talking very rural municipalities that we could look at and compare.
well, I think you've met your temporary obligation to try to keep people alive. That's good, but I'm still kind of out on it right now. Anybody else, Joe?
Yes, having worked in Lakewood and understanding that area, the demographics in Jefferson County, basically. Actually, Lakewood is the 8th largest city in the state. So we're talking about a homeless situation and we're saying it's comparable to what we have here. And their mission is what? Where's the mission located? I'm not sure. Do you know?
I don't know what, no, I don't have their address.
Because we're talking about a demographic area where there's a lot of people and obviously in the metropolitan area of Denver. And Jefferson County is, Lakewood is part of Jefferson County. And Lakewood is the 8th largest city in the state. Or maybe larger now, but in any case, as I vision that area, I'm trying to think where that rescue mission might be. And that would have a whole lot to do with, how things are done there and comparable to, or in comparison to what we're doing here. I think that probably what we're doing now in terms of the mission and managing it ourselves is the best way we could go based on what's happened in the past. That's where I am. So, I mean, again, without knowing a lot more than has been presented as it relates to Lakewood, and in terms of comparison of size, they're larger than we are. So, and there's a metropolitan area there of about 500,000 people. So, anyway, those are my thoughts.
Councilor Flores, please.
Yeah, thank you for this information. It's really valuable. Everything, any kind of problem that's presented to us as city council, it always comes down to money and employees and legal liability and all of that kind of stuff. I was encouraged by what I saw in the paper a couple of days ago, I think, where this organization is going to try to get a census, try to get a handle of how many people we're really talking about here. I'm encouraged by that because I don't think we know everything we should know about the homeless population. It's kind of like an enigma in many ways because we just don't have credible information. So I'm hoping that that's going to give us some information. But what I'd like you to do, if there's time, is figure out, if you go into the depths of homeless people, there's really 3 major things that contribute to that. It's usually mental health, it's addiction, and then lack of housing, which is obvious as a result of that. But when you look at the money that comes into not only the cities that you've talked about, but the money that comes into Pueblo for our mental health organizations, our addiction organizations, and our housing organizations, I guarantee you that if you looked at their grants that they receive from the feds or the state, that they are indicating that they are helping with the homeless population. And I haven't ever seen any credible data as to what they're actually doing, whether they're actually making a difference, and also getting some sort of report that they've made a difference. And I really believe that there is a lot of money out there to help a community like Pueblo by looking at these organizations, that if they're dealing with the homeless that are addicted, or they're dealing with the homeless because they have mental health issues, even housing organizations outside of our housing, they're also trying to deal with this. Why are we as a city, taking 100% of the responsibility? It seems that part of their mission should be paying for a homeless shelter. This is something that's really bugged me, is that if anything is going wrong in the city of Pueblo doing with the homeless, nobody is looking where the money is going. They're looking at us we have no money. We're always trying to take money from Peter to pay Paul. And I really would like to understand, we have the mental health the state hospital here. We have one of the largest mental health clinics, 2 of the largest addiction clinics. Why aren't they part of solving it? And I know we can't do it in the short run here, but it's something I just want you to keep in the back of your head. I can't even imagine the amount of millions that we're getting for mental health. And if that's part of the problem with the homeless, why aren't they helping us with all of these financial issues as far as trying to come up with a permanent solution for housing, for mental health, addiction, and then be proud of our successes if that's what it is? Because I don't know if all these other organizations have any success. We don't get any reports on that. But I just want you to think about that. I think at the end of the day, I would favor looking for professional people that do this for a living. We've had a lot of success in the city in subcontracting, certain things for people, if there's a market out there. I mean, if you put out an RFP and we don't get any response, or we just get one response, we have to be very skeptical of that. But that's my 2 cents. And thank you.
Council Maestri, please.
Well, in answer to Mr. Latino's question, that's the Harley Davidson store in that picture, and it is on Colfax between Wadsworth and Kipling. So whether we take it on ourselves or we take the shortfall for the nonprofit and pay that, it looks like we're going to be adding possibly $1 million to our already $8.6 million deficit for 2025. And at the same time, we're trying to ask the taxpayers for money, and so that's the simplest math of it all. We're taking a hard hit. I was concerned when we took back the shelter without having done our 2025 budget and had nothing appropriated in there for that, for this expense. So it's hard to, vote to add more money to that deficit for 2025 while asking, the taxpayers for a tax. I understand the shelter needs to be run. Of course, again, we'd be taking on another non-departmental if we took the nonprofit. And we talk about how the non-departmentals are not covering the expenses in their operations like we expected them to relieve the burden from the city, so we don't have $8-9 million in non-departmentals every year still added to our budget. I think that's what the last amount was. It's a difficult thing to take on when we're asking the taxpayers to pay an additional tax. And so that's how I see it. I guess we'll have to see what happens here.
Okay, thank you. I think I've President, I forget your name.
Mark. I'm Mark.
Aliff.
I just want to clarify my statements. Is that here's where I'm on the fence. I don't think you're adding $1 million to your expenses. I think you're reducing $1 million to your expenses based upon the amount of money that we spend and we're going to spend. I don't know that to be true because we don't have the actual numbers that show us what we spend every year on specific programs, most specifically for the rescue mission and any kind of homeless services that we do. I'm saying if you consolidate those services into this division, that you'll spend less money than you're spending now. So you may reduce the overall expenses on the budget, even though it shows $1 million expense. And the other thing, it just hit me when Councilor Flores was talking. The reason that people always come to us is because we do it. They go to the county, but the county doesn't do anything. They go to other places and try and get things done, and they don't do anything. But the city has stepped up for years, for at least 6 years that I know of, and said, we're going to do something and we're going to be proactive in the way that we deal with this issue. But I don't know why we would expect that it's going to cost us $1 million to do it without any kind of commitment from the county, because the county should have just as much responsibility towards this as the city. And unfortunately, we just haven't put our foot down and said, listen, you guys need to pony up and pay part of these expenses because we can't do it alone. It's becoming too much of a burden on the city alone. But the county has a responsibility to be a part of the solution. And they have yet to ever come forward with, I don't know of a dollar. Do you, Mayor, since you've been mayor?
No,
$1.
they haven't provided any resources for the shelter since we've taken it over.
Zero. Zero. And I think it takes community support where community members challenge the county. When are you going to be a part of this? So we don't have to foot the entire bill and do this on our own. But the truth is that they know that whether they do it or not, that the city's going to step up because we have a responsibility towards this. So, I mean, I just want to make sure that if we saw the actual numbers, it may be less to do it as a city-owned proper or a city-owned mission or whatever you want to call it.
Thank you. Councilor Maestri, please.
Can I see the revenue sources slide? So right now, we're looking at the CDBG at 109,000. So that would be specific to this shelter where we do receive quite a bit of CBDG grant funding. But doesn't a large portion of that go to Posada? Don't we put out about 200,000 a year to Posada? So we couldn't be like moving those funds, or then Posada would be losing out on the housing portion of that. And plus it's dedicated to housing, correct?
So of CDBG, up to 15% can be used for services. So yes, Posada does, because of the homelessness services that they do apply for this and get some funds.
Correct.
These CDBG funds, to be clear, we would not say in the year 2025, we're going to take funds that have already been awarded to Posada.
Mhm.
The ramp up time, the lead time for these CDBG dollars is almost 24 months. So we will start the process for 2027. So what we're talking about is in 2027. We couldn't even apply for funds prior to that. And that's why, President Aliff, to your point, why you don't see some of these revenue sources coming in right away. But yes, there is absolutely, when we're talking about applying to CDBG, we would still have to apply for our own. But of course, I think that it would be a competitive application, and that could mean that an organization like Posada or others that deal with homelessness services may not have as competitive of an application and have funding reduced. There is
Mhm.
always a give and take here.
Yeah, so that might be, kind of defeating that purpose here in our community when we need those monies for housing. The other thing of the $16.4 million, there was a lot of ARPA dollars entangled in that, which we'll never see again. And so it is kind of strange, we're averaging 3 to 4 million a year that we've been spending, but at the same time, a lot of those dollars aren't really coming back to us. This is what we have to look at, what you've really put in front of us, rather than to look at what was in that 16.4 million pot, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so it's going to be at that. Okay. All right. Well, the other thing too is this would be, for 2025, it's solely coming out of our general fund. Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Martinez, please.
Thanks. So Melissa, I know that one of the points that you touched on was that should the city retain this as its own city department, the donations aren't necessarily tax exempt. Because we're not a 501c3, can we take private donations?
Yeah, so we're looking into that. We do think that we can take donations. There would have to be a fund set up through council to receive those donations. We've received other things like in-kind land for parks,
Sure.
that sort of thing. And so it would be treated just the same, but it would not be that tax exempt or charitable contribution for any organization.
And so, when I hear us talking about the city subsidize is gonna, is gonna have to subsidize this. I think that the city is gonna have to subsidize it way more should we retain this as a department, because I'm assuming that people are gonna donate less because they're not gonna be able to, have it claimed on their taxes. So I think that that's something that we need to consider, is if we retain this in-house, I imagine, or I'm assuming that the financial donations to which this budget is, I mean, there's clearly gap funding. Donations are going to be crucial to fill that gap funding. They're going to be fewer than if it was a nonprofit run facility that does have a 501c3 that is, does take donations, that can do charitable, donations on their taxes. So that's another reason why I think that we should do an RFP.
Okay. This is for our interim finance director, Dan. I'm just kind of curious. I think Mark was kind of hitting around the edges without doing a cost benefit analysis. Have we looked at it through those eyes to see what he's talking about? I mean, what's the balance? What's the unbalance? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't have those figures on the top of my head. I can certainly research those. To Counselor Maestri's point also, a lot of those dollars were ARPA funds, one-time grant funding. So we can compare those out, see how we look, and present those to council.
And as far as the nonprofits helping with, I don't know how the donation is working, or they're participating and helping with this effort. I don't know how that goes, being as the city's working, but are they still participating, helping you with that stuff?
So the one nonprofit that we have the relationship with, Safe Side Recovery, they're doing all of their groups and peer support. They do all that all day long still, on top of helping us staff and run the shelter. So they're the only current nonprofit that's helping the city at all with the shelter at this point.
Yeah, and one more thing, just something that I observed, and I've been kind of throwing this out there for a while about the grants. And we forget to preempt it with tax funded grants. Right now, the federal government has decided to put a hold on all NGO federal grants right now, and that's non-governmental organizations. And I'm not going to show how that works with us, but the grant mystery money that everybody refers to, it's out there. Doesn't mean you're going to get it. Okay, and then there's a lot of things that they can put in place. So I just want to make sure we're all careful about just saying, oh, grants are going to solve it. They don't always solve it. Okay. But anybody have anything else? Sarah Martinez.
I think that just for the mayor, the freeze is unfroze, correct? There's no longer a freeze on NGO funding.
It literally changes by the hour right now. They
Okay.
keep going back and forth and then going line by line saying this is frozen, this is unfrozen. So it's kind of ride the wave to see what happens at the moment.
Okay.
Anything else from council? We good?
So Counselor Gomez, we're kind of looking for some direction to council, whether you want us to continue with the RFP process and get it posted and out, whether you want us to come back and show you what it would look like more if it was a city department, how many employees it would specifically be, what the funding source would be for the remainder of 2025, what that could potentially look for 2026. Like I said, Safe Side has enough funding that the council has allocated for about 3.5 more months. So I think if we're gonna put this out to RFP, this is something that we need to get working on now, so we give enough time frame for people to apply. If the council wants to take the direction of making this into a city department, there'll probably be additional steps that we would need to bring in front of council to do so. So I'm looking for direction to move forward.
Council Maestri, real quick.
One last question. So if we go into it as a city department, would the employees be part of the general workers union? And were those wages figured under the general workers union?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Council Martinez, anything else?
RFP.
Well, how quickly do you have to come to that decision? You want it tonight?
If you could, Counselor.
Counselor
I'll
Flores.
I'll reiterate, I'd like to see an RFP, looking at what's out there with nonprofits.
We can also work at the same time, so we could put the RFP out, gather more information and bring it back to council on what a timeline and funding would look like while the RFP is potentially out to see if we get somebody coming in that would be a great fit, great partner for the city. And if not, what next steps would be, we could do those you know what I'm saying, simultaneously, yeah.
President Mark Aliff, please.
I'm okay with the putting an RFP out with the continued conversation of how this might look if it. Again, I'm of the understanding that it's gonna cost us $1 million a year, no matter what we do. And do you want to control it or you do not want to control it? That's what it all boils down to. I'm a control freak. I like control. But I'm okay with an RFP as we continue the conversation.
It's a good issue, control. What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, I agree. I'm also a control freak, as you all know, so.
Okay. Just,
Just a comment, and that is if we
Counselor
have,
Flores.
if we sub it out to a nonprofit, there's also control there contractually. We have to be smart about putting a contract together that gets us everything that we want and making sure that that contract is followed by every letter that we put in there. So that's going to be important. So that is another way of controlling. Thank you.
So the next step is in reference to excuse me, forgot about you, Mr.
He forgot
Lupino.
about me. He forgot about me.
It's pretty easy. I didn't.
I personally think that we need to continue in the manner that we have, at least for the present time. And with the city managing this until we can get things put together. Thank you.
Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3 RFPs, 1 continue as is. And then Counselor Maestri and Counselor Gomez, what was your take?
Jeez.
Did you say yours, Counselor Maestri?
No, I'll just sail through the process, see where we go. When it
Okay.
comes time to vote, I'll have a decision on.
Yeah, I don't want to commit to that right now either. I'm not feeling comfortable that I have the clear, and I don't know if you're talking about into perpetuity forever. You're
No. I'm just asking, is the council okay with the city putting out the RFP, see what we potentially get back, and then we'll continue to have conversations of what it would look like in the meantime if it was a city department.
I guess I don't have a problem with putting the RFP out. I don't.
At the end of the day, we're still going to have to ratify it
Yeah.
with some ordinance in the future. I mean, there you can say no if nothing looks good. So I don't think we lose anything but obtain valuable information.
That
Second
sounds
word?
good. That's enough. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Joe, anybody? We good? All right, anybody have any, okay, we're good. I'm sorry. Thank you, Melissa Cook. I appreciate it very much. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to go to agenda item C, the natural medicine regulations by Mr. Scott Hobson, the acting director, planning and community development, I guess, director. Welcome, Scott. Thank you.
Good evening. I have with me also Barrett Odom, who's a principal planner in the planning department, and Hannah Princey, who's our planner. And they helped to draft the regulation that we proposed to city council. So we have maps, and then we also can provide handouts as when we get to the zoning and the buffers for natural medicine, the text amendment. First, before we get started, I want to give you a little bit of background on natural medicine that's covered under Senate Bill 23-290. So Colorado voters passed Proposition 122, access to natural psychedelic substances, in 2022. which decriminalize the therapeutic possession, grow, and share. But I want to make it clear, but not the sale of psychedelic substances for individuals ages 21 and older. It decriminalized psilocin and psilocybin, which are found in psychedelic mushrooms, natural medicines. Natural medicines, they do not include synthetic or synthetic analogs, which are substances like LSD. Individuals 21 years of age and older may grow and use natural medicines in private under the provisions of the bill. Under Senate Bill 23-290, the state legislation creates licenses for 4 natural medicine businesses. And those are number 1, healing centers. These are state licensed facilities where a licensed facilitator provides and supervises the use of natural medicine for therapeutic means. The participant may not be released from these centers until they are showing no obvious effects from taking the natural medicines. The second license is for cultivation centers. These are state licensed facilities that grow, prepare, and package natural medicine for a healing center, not for sale or public distribution. The third is testing facilities. These are state licensed facilities that analyze and certify the safety and potency of the natural medicines. And then the fourth type of business is manufacturing facilities. These are state licensed facilities that manufacture, prepare, package of natural medicines that are utilized by the healing centers. Make it clear it's for the healing centers. Natural medicine cannot be sold to individual customers under the state law. So we went out to the Department of Regulatory Agencies website to look at how many applications the state has received as of January 24th of this year for the 4 types of applications. And what we found out was statewide, there have been 7 licenses applications submitted to the statewide for healing centers. There have been 3 license applications for cultivation facilities. There's been 1 application for product manufacturer, and there's been 1 application to the state for testing facilities. This is not Pueblo, this is statewide.
Chairman, can I ask a quick question? Scott, when you say that these aren't Pueblo, are any of these, and I understand that they're statewide, are any of these in Pueblo?
You can answer.
Thank you for the question. As of when this was published, January 2024, they were all concentrated in the Denver area. So it was.
That's okay. That's all
Denver, Aurora, Centennial, Lakewood, according to this data so far.
Okay, so when you if you want to compare this to when marijuana was authorized through the state, we had 40 applications through the city for the different types of uses and double the number of inquiries. So to date, we have had 0 inquiries for any of these types of licenses within the city of Pueblo. So not that we shouldn't control and have regulation, but we're not being inundated at all like we were with marijuana. So under the Senate bill, what are we authorized to be able to do at a local level? A local jurisdiction may enact ordinances and regulations governing the place, manner, time. So that means zone districts, buffers from childcare and schools, those types of regulations. Although a local jurisdiction may not prohibit the establishment or operation of natural medicine, any of the 4 facilities, we can't just zone it out and not allow it at all in the city. Also, a local jurisdiction may not adopt ordinances that are unreasonable or in conflict with the state legislation. if a local jurisdiction does not adopt regulations, then natural medicine businesses will be controlled and regulated solely by the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies and the Department of Revenue. So that's the challenge the city has, is if we don't adopt regulations, then these types of operations can operate in the city under the state regulations. So under our current proposed text amendment, we've looked at different zone districts, and under our proposed amendment, which was reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission, healing centers would be uses by right in multiple residential and office districts. So the R5 zone district, that's the same zone district that all the hospitals are, and most medical offices are within that zone district. Also, the multiple residential and commercial district, R6, the neighborhood office, O1 district, and then all business districts, B1 through B4, and then the business park zone district, which is usually a combination of some level of commercial and industrial merged into one area. None of the healing centers would be allowed within any residential only zone districts or any of the historic districts. Now for cultivation centers, testing and manufacturing facilities, those would only be allowed as uses by right within business parks and within the industrial zone districts, I1 through I3. So there could be adjustments to the proposed ordinance that could reduce or limit some of these zone districts. We certainly are interested in City Council's comments. We could have those comments now, or we could go through the rest of the presentation and come back to what zone districts we might be allowed to do. And I'll ask the chairman what you'd like to do on that.
You want to do? President Ayla. So I was one of the proponents of not passing this the other night. And it was specifically for these reasons, plus the distances. My question is the only thing I can compare it to is we have needle exchanges based upon the zoning. If it can be in a neighborhood office or a multiple residential and commercial, notably R5 and R6, that stuck those specifically in neighborhoods, around houses, and close to schools without much of a buffer zone. I don't think there was much planning in the way that that went forward. And I don't think that if we would have had these discussions when those specific businesses came in, that we would have a lot of the problems that we've had over the last several years. So all I'm concerned about is that I don't think they should be in any residential. I think that and I'm talking specifically of the healing centers. I would like to see the healing centers the same as cultivation, testing, and manufacturing without the residential. And then I know you're going to get to the distances in further down the slide, but that's what my concern is. And I guess my question would be, is that possible? Is that overzealous or?
It could be, we could, as a city, look at not including any of the R districts, the R5, the R6, and potentially maybe the neighborhood office, and possibly the B1. If we were to look at this again from a staff level, we might suggest not having it in R5 and eliminating O1, because those could be medical offices that are near neighborhood residential areas. And then potentially the B1 district, which is a neighborhood business district. The other districts The B2 through B4 are pretty much commercial districts, and the business park is a combination of some commercial and industrial, but typically those are quite a ways from any kind of residential type of development. And then the cultivation, testing, and manufacturing facilities, those are all either going to be allowed in business parks or exclusively industrial districts. But I'd be open for any further comments and discussion from council on how we might want to move forward if we wanted to adjust the ordinance.
Yeah, I want to add a comment, and this is, I'm really concerned about the, for lack of a better term, the verbiage that they continue to use for all these experiments. It started out with recreational marijuana, then it went to, now we're at healing centers, then we have harm reduction. And my concern is that I don't know if we're ever going to get to the point where we start really looking at this stuff and see what we're setting up for. I read this and I was wondering, what micro dosages? What does that mean? Does that mean we elevate to how many times you can take a microdose, or you can add to it? A lot of the stuff that you're throwing at us is the same issues I had when we talked about marijuana. Now, the marijuana of today is pretty potent stuff, but it started as recreational. And what we're doing here, we keep on setting up for these experiments. I am so opposed to this, I can't begin to tell you. I don't care about the money. I don't care. I just think it's ill-advised. That's just my opinion. Sarah?
I can at least speak to the Micro Healing Center. So that's one of the license applications on the Department of Revenue. And so that is, a healing center is a specific place where someone goes and is supervised and takes natural medicine. A micro center is what we would consider an accessory use. So where a therapy office is now or a medical office is now, they would apply for a micro healing center, and that could be one of the things they offer to patients. It would still have to follow the state buffers and any zoning and extra buffers we would set in our ordinance.
Yeah, thanks. Really fast on for point of clarification, on the legend, there's no little triangle that's half yellow, half blue.
The legend, basically, the yellow are the districts that would allow for healing centers.
No, Scott, the triangles that are on the map. So the triangles, what are those? You know what I'm asking, Barrett?
So those are either a school or a childcare facility. I'm not exactly certain.
Okay.
GIS helped us put these together really fast because we don't know how to use the new program.
They look beautiful.
They did a good job in a couple of days. Another thing to note is the residential childcare facilities. We have not put them into GIS, so those have not been buffered. Once those go into GIS and they're buffered, this is going to expand larger.
Oh, this does not include
So this is
childcare.
minimum. This includes childcare centers. So a facility that has a large amount of kids.
Not
like the
homes.
East side, not homes.
Okay.
Exactly. So the triangles are either a center or a school.
Okay.
Okay.
I understand when council is saying, they have concerns. What are we doing? How do we move forward? Unfortunately, though, because this has been voted in by the vote of the people and it's in state statute, I don't want to get us in a position where we're putting undue, whatever Barrett, you said a couple weeks ago, undue burden or classifications on these, because by state statute, that's written in there, and then we're opening ourselves to lawsuits. So I understand the frustration, I understand the confusion, but because this is written into state statute that we cannot go above and beyond regulating them unjustly, or not unjustly, but crazily, I don't want us to open up into lawsuits. So I am moving forward good with what staff recommended originally and in this, what you have here, Scott.
We have the ability to put some significant controls on all of this. you know, like I said, I'm very concerned. Right now, we still have I still have issues with the Needle Exchange because within 10 feet of a residential neighborhood in Bessemer off of Northern Avenue, you're 10 feet from a residential neighborhood plus all the iconic businesses, and it's surely within range of where it shouldn't be, but it's just happening and it's continued to be able to be placed in that position. I'm talking about the Southern Colorado Harm Reduction Association. These are things that are being clearly violated, and it's a real problem for me. This is just something else that we're going to look the other way and we're not going to address. That's my concern. Councilman Latino.
Thank you, Councilman Gomez. I agree with you 100%. When I look at this and we're talking about 1,000-foot childcare buffer and 1,000-foot school buffer, having been in education, again, I'm not trying to be pretentious, but at the time, the largest school system in the state of Colorado, and being in Pueblo where I was raised, I don't want any of this, any part of this. I don't like it and I'm not going to support it.
Please. Council Maestro.
I think the best term crazy is crazy when we're decriminalizing the drug usages in our community. But what is in reference to the marijuana statutes in reference to what they're distancing in from the childcare centers and the residential neighborhoods, the ordinance that you proposed to us, was that less distance or was it the same distance? Oh, I was kind of wondering why when I saw a marijuana facility and then I saw the school, like, I thought that was pretty close because I thought that I thought it was a mile from the school.
The distancing we were proposing was the same
It's the same.
for
Mhm.
that's used for marijuana. One of the things
So-
that we could do is that in the ordinance, we have the distancing is for 1,000 feet is for healing centers only.
Mhm.
But the other three operations are only allowed in industrial. We could adjust the ordinance to have the 1,000-foot buffer apply to all four of the different types of operations. And even though if by chance there's a daycare facility or a school, we could still have the 1,000-foot buffer or whatever buffer you would choose that we could use apply to all different types of operations.
So
Right now,
are you saying the healing centers can't also be just designated to the industrial areas and are you saying?
Well, I think when we get to the buffer maps, I think that's where, as a staff, we're trying to be conscientious of council's concerns, but also we're not trying to set us up to where we would be determined to be unreasonable in where we would allow these.
So would that determine us unreasonable if we just tried to designate them to the industrial areas along with the manufacturing part of it?
Well, we have the maps we're going to bring up to show you based on like if we went to a 1 mile or to a half mile versus the 1,000-foot.
Yeah, we have them in front of us. So, okay. All right, let's go into that discussion and see where you think that maybe we could expand the 1,000-foot and yet not be what is deemed to be unreasonable or crazy. Because like, again, I think crazy is the fact that we've decriminalized drug usage
And,
in
you know,
our,
and we
in our
have
state.
taken-
Nothing against you guys,
Yeah,
but
we've
you know.
taken a position that we're looking at trying to have an ordinance, land use ordinance that gives us authority to be able to regulate this and not just leave it up to the state statute to be the governing mechanism without any local regulation. So
Is
and
that
that's why we're all here tonight.
great?
So under the buffers as proposed in our ordinance, no healing center shall be operated out of a building within 1,000 feet of a school which holds classes and programs or a childcare center and home. And as Barrett explained, we we have the child centers identified by address, and those are mapped. We currently do not have the child care homes identified, but we are in the process of getting that done. Once we get those addresses identified, then that's going to be added to the buffers, and those buffers are going to be more than what they are, what you're looking at as far as the maps tonight. And then, as I said earlier, the ordinance could be changed to include a buffer for all natural medicine businesses. So it could apply to the businesses that are would only be allowed in industrial zones, and that same buffer could apply to healing centers as well as the other 3 types of operations.
I just want to throw something in real quick, Scott. Usually I'm pretty strong on decentralizing a lot of projects, but to me, we should go back to more centralized locations. Like you talked about the business areas or the commercial areas. And I've recommended this before, right across on 4th Street, double highway. You have no residential, you have mostly business. And those are the areas I would like to see it in. But I don't know, dispersing this stuff, again, I'm just think you should consider those commercial areas only. And let's stop spreading whatever side you might be on this thing, but get it back to where it's within manageable for us as well. I don't see I think we're going too far outside the.
Okay. So just as examples, we ran the childcare centers and the schools, the buffer for those at a 1 mile buffer. And it basically zoned pretty much all of any of the developed areas of the city out. So if you look at the North Vista Highlands up at the north, and then Airport Industrial Park, the Airport West Industrial Area, and then South Point, the only real area that is developed is the area just to the west of I-25. The Pinion Ridge area would be the only place really where there's any development that would allow those. That's at the 1 mile buffer. And again, these have not taken into account daycare homes, which we're going to be looking at.
And if I may, we added the area of Colorado Springs because that is the buffer they passed, but it is a 4 times larger area. So what would be covering and zoning out all of our city isn't necessarily doing that in the Springs.
One more thing, I gotta just. I'm worried about always what happens with the slow exposure of this kind of stuff. You know, you're driving around and there's your mommy and daddy and, oh, what's that place? That's the Natural Medicine Healing Center. Well, what does that mean? We've got to be careful of what we're doing and what we're getting exposed to these kids. Right now, again, I know what you guys, I hope you can, well, I'd like to hear, as a matter of fact, I'd like to hear from the police chief, if you can, chief, if you have any comments in this, because I think that's another area that we need to get some advice from. So, natural best.
Good evening. I agree. I don't like these things. I don't want them in my community. The problem we have, the voters of the state of Colorado voted and passed this. So it's coming whether we want it or not. The state, the way that the amendment or the proposition was written only allows us as a community to, and I don't know if regulate's the right word legally, but to regulate these and where they go through the processes that are occurring through zoning. So my recommendation, although I agree with your sentiment and that which has been spoken of from other counselors, this is not going to be good for our community, but the only way that we can prevent it from being just wherever is through this process. So although you may not want them here, they're coming. And the way we regulate where they are and how many of them could be here is through the process of zoning within the restrictions that are applied through the Colorado state law as it went into as a constitutional amendment. I don't know if that helps.
I think that is right on the money, that, as far as I'm concerned. Anybody else? Council Flores.
Yeah, I just, I mean, if you go to the law itself, as it's written, it indicates that, it outlines the duties of, the director of this at the state level. And they go through a litany of what its powers are. The question that I have is, as long as we stay within the parameters of this law, it seems, and you indicated we have no applicants at this point, so it's not an emergency situation, but it seems to me that, we need to stay within the parameters of the law. And the law itself gives us some latitude as to where they go, what we can do. It seems to me that we should have outlined our position as to dealing with all the issues that you've heard and putting them in a location that complies with the law, but also safeguards our community. And I think that's probably the approach you used, isn't it?
Thank you, Chief.
Yes, although, we're open to council's comments and concerns, and we certainly could look at making adjustments based on the comments and concerns that we've heard at the hearing as well as tonight. And what we can show you is this is the buffers for schools and childcare facilities. It doesn't include childcare homes. This doesn't show all the zone, these are only allowed in certain zone districts. So limiting what zone districts healing centers can be allowed within. And then this doesn't show just, the industrial zone district. So for the other three operations, that limits quite a bit of the area of the city. We could go back and look at, for example, maybe what would a 1,500-foot buffer mean? One of the things we've done is we've shown these maps to the city attorney's office, and the half mile and the 1 mile seem like they may be too extensive of buffers. We could go back and look at maybe 1,200 or 1,500 feet and come back and share those with council, as well as if we were to potentially reduce some of the zone districts for the healing centers. If that's direction from council, we could certainly do that. I guess my question is would this be able to continue the hearing on the ordinance to where we may come back to council and then have amendments to the ordinance?
My concern is that somehow some of the comments that I've heard here is that we want nothing to do with this, which I think is the wrong approach to take, because the law is already the law. What you're asking for, let's make it as tough as possible with these locations there's also provisions in the law that says that if you make some recommendations that are, not attainable for these people, if this ever happens, that they have a method of being able to protest that or sue us. So so it's not that we are voting on whether we like this or not. That's already been established in the state. It's really having the safeguards for the city of Pueblo and making and identifying the areas that we all agree to. And I think everybody is saying they want to make it as tough as possible for them to locate here. And if we can find that happy medium between that and not going overboard, we need to pass this ordinance, or we're going to get an applicant and not have any guardrails at all. And this is what you're asking under that ordinance, is to have the guardrails. The law is already the law. And, I think I'd like to see the 12 or 15, feet as an option, but I don't want to, I don't know. It seems to me that we could leave the ordinance as is. But if we need to file an amendment at the time that that's presented during the public hearing, we might, if 12 and 15 look better for us and it doesn't compromise going overboard with the state of Colorado, I think we could just amend it at that point to
We certainly could provide a 1,200-foot buffer and a 1,500-foot buffer. And potentially we'd be able to map the childcare homes and get those addresses and then buffer from those. Those could add some changes, maybe fairly significant to the buffers. And then the other thing is whether or not you would want us to, when we apply those buffers, if there's any of the zone districts that you'd like to have us reconsider for the healing centers. For example, whether or not the R5, maybe R6, and maybe B1 and O1, those are areas that those businesses are usually more located near neighborhoods, although the school buffers may take those out anyway, or the childcare center homes may take those out anyway. But we certainly could do a map that excluded those zone districts if you were interested in us doing that.
Okay, Counselor Martinez, please.
You know, I guess we can, Scott, to your point, like, you know, see the map. I guess for Mr. Gifford, where's the line? Is it 1,500 feet, 1,600 feet?
Again, I think it's the reasonableness factor. So if you were to look at your map and you were to make it 2,000 feet, and that essentially makes it so that these can't go in anywhere, I think a court would look at that as being a little unreasonable. The city attorney, Carla Sykes, she's looked into this a lot more than I have. She might be able to add something a little more profound or intelligent on the matter.
I guess, you know, as we're considering adding childcare homes, I mean, are in every neighborhood. And off the top of my head, I mean, there's several childcare homes. So once those are added, there's going to be way more buffers in the city. Carla, I guess, what do you think? Like, where's the line?
I just wanted to kind of clarify, under the state statute, childcare homes actually should be buffered, although city council could choose to reduce the types of facilities under our ordinance that should be buffered, but under the state law, both childcare centers and childcare homes are included within the buffer.
Okay.
Say that one more time, Scott.
Under the state statute, childcare homes and childcare centers are the 1,000-foot buffer applies to those.
Okay.
Okay. We good?
I want to hear, sorry, Counselor,
You're good.
from Carla on what she, like, where's the line for when we're going to get sued versus not when we're going to get sued?
So I don't think there's any bright line. I think when you get to the line where you have constructively prohibited them from operating in anywhere within the city, that's where you run into the problem, because we can't prohibit them either constructively or explicitly through our ordinances or our regulations. And so when Scott and I talked about it, you know, you have the 1,000-foot buffer, and then you have the particular zones that they are allowed to work or locate in. You're going to have to take a look at that and make sure that it's a reasonableness test, really. Is that a reasonable area for these places to locate? Or are there enough locations where they could feasibly go in and operate there? If you're looking at it and you look at something like this, then I would say that is unreasonable, because there's really no place within the city that they can operate. So it's going to come down to what those buffer zones look like. And it's going to be a reasonableness test, but you cannot prohibit them through regulation, constructively prohibit them from operating within the city.
Okay, Council Maestri.
Yeah, this half mile, just kind of these little yellow areas are what's available after put everything up, correct?
Well, and then you have to determine whether or not those are the proper zones that they can operate within. So if those aren't, for instance, a B3 or a business zone that allows them, then they wouldn't be able to go into those yellow zones.
Okay.
So the yellow zones are the zone districts that would allow,
Oh, is that what it
Yeah.
allow?
That would
Okay.
allow.
those are
Okay.
the, it doesn't distinguish between the I districts or the R5, R6, but those would be the
Yes,
zone
yeah.
districts that are not
So you
buffered
could have
out.
a south side location, a north side location, an east side and a west side.
Yeah. So
Allowed. So there's some allowed areas there, right?
there's some, yeah.
Mhm.
But your challenge is gonna be is that, does that effectively prohibit them from reasonably operating within the city?
Do the bus routes go to all of these? That's right.
Yeah, well, I mean, that might be what it comes down to, right? I mean,
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? If it's
Yeah.
access,
if they have
access
access.
transportation wise,
Mhm.
they have the access transportation wise, if they have. If they, you know.
If it's affordable, if there's
Mhm.
locations where they can actually purchase, or if they have to, you know, if they can lease a space, if they have to construct a space, because if they can only build a building, then that may be considered prohibitive
Mhm.
in those areas, because there's no available real estate. So those may be considerations that they talk about, but no one's challenged anything yet, so it's not
Mhm.
like we know, but those are the kinds of things that you need to consider.
Mhm.
And then counselors, one of the things you may consider that this might be the way to approach this is when the ordinance comes before council again at the next meeting, provide direction on what changes you might want
Amend
to
it.
see, and then have the ordinance referred back to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then we can draft an ordinance that addresses those concerns, and then run it back through P and Z, and then come back to city council with an ordinance, and then has another recommendation from planning and zoning. And that's one of the options that's in, we put in every background paper for ordinances, is that it could be referred back to planning and zoning commission, and then come with specific direction, and then reheard at planning and zoning, and then come back to city council.
Councilor Maestri, please.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
You did. Councilor Martinez.
Yeah, so they can take the fall.
It comes back to city council, so you'll have a final, you'll be the final approvers.
President Neal.
Thank you. I don't know why we would go back to anybody. I mean, literally a week ago, we had it on our agenda and it was ready to go, and now we want to go through all these motions. The reality is that I think we just need to decide as a council, do you want it in neighborhoods or not? If you want it in neighborhoods, leave it the way it is. If you don't want it in neighborhoods, make it industrial with 1,000-foot buffer. I mean, I don't know why we go through all these gyrations. I think that the residential needs to go away. I don't know why I would have to amend that come the next meeting. Isn't the whole reason that we have a work session is to decide? So staff can come forward with with an ordinance that we can vote on. I think the direction is on residential or non-residential. It should all be an industrial with 1,000-foot buffer and move on down the road.
Council Latino.
I agree 100% with Councilman Aliff. Again, I don't want these places anywhere near young people. They got enough to deal with. And I can share stories with you that'll just, tear your heart apart. And I'm going to share one with you, and then I'm going to let it go, and I'm going to stop. Me having to call 3 families to tell them their kids have overdosed in a community in the Jefferson County, and having to call the police and first aids to come to take these kids to the hospital. I don't want anything to do with that. And the marijuana was being grown in a yard down the street from the high school. Again, nothing near schools. That's where I am. Thank you.
Councilor Flores.
I can agree with Counselor President Aliff's approach to this. The question is that reasonable? And could we be too restrictive in just using industrial? What's your opinion about that?
But it's gonna come down to the mapping, how many areas are available. If you just restrict it to industrial, does that mean you're gonna take out all business zones too? Would that be the direction, or is it just to take out residential, leave business and industrial? Because right now there's some areas where it's allowed in certain business districts. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, if you were gonna look at some level of restriction, the neighborhood business district, so B1, maybe keep B2, B3, and B4, or keep B3 and B4 and look at eliminating B1 and B2, which would be more businesses that might likely be closer to or within residential areas, adjacent to residential areas.
So what I'm hearing is you want to take all residential out, and you could potentially restrict it to B3, B4 in industrial areas with 1,000-foot buffer.
Sarah?
So as long as it's reasonable.
What's that?
So as long as it's reasonable.
As long as it's reasonable.
And I think also the business park, it seems like that's like an industrial with some level of commercial, but those are not near residential neighborhoods. Those are either in adjacent to commercial districts or in the middle of industrial districts. It
Council
wouldn't
Clark.
seem, it would seem that those aren't gonna
Yeah.
really be near, those would meet the intent of not being by residential areas.
So we've got Council Forrest, you're fine with that? Regina? Okay. You know where you stand, Mark? I think we know where we're at.
We do have to get that language for the amendment
Okay.
on the vote. Right.
So with that direction, we could redraft the ordinance. I think we'll get legal opinion on whether or not that would have to go back to planning and zoning, or whether that ordinance could be amended at city council.
If we amended it at city council, could we have the language to make sure that we make the proper amendment? Okay.
Yeah, we'll look into that. And then to the extent you can amendment, we'll have that language ready for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. Mayor, anything else? We're good? Okay, I guess we're good. Thank you, Scott. and Thank you, Carla. We have one more thing I want to, before we wrap up tonight. Just for the record, we're going to have our retreat on February 22nd. And then your location retreat will take place in the chamber. We're talking at about 8:00 a.m. morning, and we'll conclude when we finish the agenda for the night. And if there's anybody else has any other suggestions, get them to me by tomorrow, because I'm going to be meeting with other staff to make sure we get the scheduling done by 2 p.m. Other than that, anybody got anything else? I think we are adjourned.